Shaping scales on the belt sander is actually really fun. It's a lot of just rounding off the sharp corners around the edges and shaping it to your desire, so a lot of art kind of goes into this part. Basically whittling away everything that doesn't look like a nice knife handle. This is a very good time to be wearing a respirator. That dust is very fine and not good for your lungs. Starting to take shape, and you can start to see the bit of the grain showing through from the fiberglass from the micarta. Once I get it pretty close to round on the sander, I just go by hand and start buffing it out. I started with 100 grit sandpaper, and this is a 150. I move all the way up to about 300. And you can see it's starting to really take shape and look like a fluid piece of handle or grip, carved. The small pores inside of the micarta get clogged up with the dust, so it's hard to get a good feel for the actual finish of the material during sanding. So I wipe it off with a wet rag, and that gives you a really good idea of what it's going to look like when it's finished. Starting to work on the edge just a little bit, not sharpening it, but making the edge finer so that after the finish goes on, it's less work to put the final razor edge on it. Applying the finish to the metal is a little bit backwards here, but I couldn't think of a better way to do it, so I'm taping off all of the micarta and cutting out all of the areas where the metal pokes through the micarta, the pins, the spine, the belly of the handle, so that there's no shiny metal exposed. This isn't for any kind of camouflage thing. I just happen to have this paint, and I wanted to provide some corrosion resistance. And I didn't feel like polishing up all of the steel. So this is a lot of tedious work with a X-Acto knife. But it worked surprisingly well. There are different ways to go about this in the future. If I want to put a metal finish on the knife, I probably figure out a way to do it before applying the scales, which I've got a couple of ideas, but I'll have to try those out and do those in a future video. This way seemed to work. This was only about 20 minutes total of doing the tape prep, which isn't bad considering how much fine detail it was, just using a sharp X-Acto. The paint I'll be applying is an epoxy paint designed for firearms. That's the color right there. It's a Coyote Brown, Brownell's Alumahide 2. It takes a full week to properly cure out, although it is hardened to the touch in about an hour. And it just goes on right like spray paint. This stuff's relatively thick, and I was going for a more of a satin or matte finish, so I put on a pretty heavy coat. But it's very easy to apply, and if you're patient, it provides a pretty durable finish, nice and smooth. I'm using a heat gun to kind of speed up the hardening process here, so that I could peel back the tape, as you see here, And I'm just going to look for any spots that got covered by the tape or any peelbacks I can quickly touch up before everything starts to set. You really can't apply any more finish over the paint. There's a bit of a window. You have about the first hour you can apply more coats and more finish, and then after that you have to wait for the full cure period. So just spraying a little bit on a piece of cardboard and using a... I'm not even sure what this is for. My wife gave them to me. It's like a little tiny Q-tip, but it's a handy little paint applicator for such purposes. And then just curing it out in front of a heater. This actually speeds up the cure time. It was about 3.5 days, and it was basically hardened. And then putting the final finish on the scales is boiled linseed oil, which is one of my favorites. It's very easy to apply. You just wipe it on, let it sit for a few minutes, wipe off the excess, and then let it sit for about 4 or 5 hours, and then reapply a coat. And it provides a very smooth, handsome, a bit of a satin finish. It provides some water resistance, although that's not a huge deal with the micarta. But I use it on almost all of my wood projects that I don't paint. As you can see, like, yeah, it's just wipe on and buff off. And there you can really see the grain of the micarta. So now I'm starting to put the final edge on the knife. I know I shouldn't be cutting towards myself, but, That's my finest stone. It's what I use obviously for putting the final edge on knives. I wouldn't try to use it for carving out an edge or reshaping a knife's edge profile. But it does put a very mirror-like, razor-sharp finish on the edge of a good knife. Trying to demonstrate a little bit of how sharp it is at this point, and really it was only about halfway there. Now it's to the point I didn't get it on camera, but it will shave the hairs on my arm. It's very sharp. And the reason I used tube instead of just solid pin stock for that bottom pin is for a lanyard. This is to be a bit of an outdoors knife, so I have a lanyard to lash it around my wrist, or just to have a piece of rope on me, or because it looks cool and it's hip and fashionable. Whatever reason you like. But so I use just a piece of this 550 paracord, which is pretty common these days. I took the center cores out. There's 7 of them, so that it's a little bit lower profile. You lose some strength this way, but I'm not going to be hanging off of a building by this, hopefully. And that's the finished knife, basically. At this point, I'm still going to be applying more coats of the boiled linseed oil. It'll probably take about 12 coats total. I've got about 3 on it, as you see here. As you can see, they kind of lighten after a few hours of curing. But it does provide for a very nice, smooth, very grippy surface for as hard as it is. And yes, there's one more thing to test. I think I've earned it.